what it is.
I'm Hannah.
And I'm Tristan.
And we're bringing you The Spectrum.
Well, guys, we're covering some pretty sick shit in today's vid. Said sick shit was done by none other than the Speckled Hen herself, Katherine Knight.
Now, about the Speckled Hen. If you ask anyone who knew Katherine about Katherine, what you would hear is, well, nothing pleasant. Not from her neighbors, not from her co-workers, not from her past lovers, and after October 2001, probably not her children either.
Also, if we're being honest, probably not before that date. The Speckled Hen was a nickname given her by John Price, but we'll get to that and him in a bit. Katherine did not have the ideal childhood for someone who would need a healthy development, a healthy mentality. Her mother, Barbara, was married to a man named Jack, and they lived in a small town in New South Wales, Hunter Valley, called Aberdeen.
She was the child of what began as an adulterous relationship, and Barbara already had 4 boys. The adulterous relationship was actually with Jack's friend and co-worker, Ken Knight.
When word of this affair got out in a small town, it may as well have been on the news. The backlash of the affair was so severe that Katherine and Ken had to leave town, and she left her 4 boys behind.
Barbara and Ken later went on to have 4 more kids, including a set of twins, Katherine being the youngest of the twins.
Ken was said to have been a mean drunk and a rapist. He would rape Barbara several times a day. Katherine would claim to have been sexually assaulted by several members of her family, but not her father, until she was the age of 11 years old. Psychiatrists accepted these claims, and those events were confirmed by several members of the Knight family. Now, if you would have asked someone who went to high school with Katherine what Katherine was like in high school, they probably would have told you that she was a fucking butthole, a bully, someone who would harass others just to see their fear. There was actually, there was one incident where she was injured by a teacher. It was determined that he acted in self-defense. Teachers would, however, say that whenever she wasn't pissed off or throwing a rage fit, that she was alright. And she would go on to win awards for good behavior.
Katherine then goes on to drop out of high school at age 15. She doesn't know how to read or write, but it doesn't really affect her, especially not for her dream job, which is cutting shit up. That's right, meat.
This guy? Who's he? Oh, this is just Jon Snow from Game of Thrones. My sister got him for me because she thought he looked like me.
She became a butcher. She was actually given her personal set of knives that she kept hung up beside her bed, and they stayed there for her entire life as a free woman.
At the abattoir that Knight worked at, she would meet her future husband, David Kellett, who, like Knight, was a heavy drinker, just released from his job at the railroad for performance issues that sprung up after witnessing 2 traumatic events, one involving his close friend in a horrible shunting accident, and the other being a school bus hit by a train, resulting in the death of 6 kids.
Often, Kellett would get into brawls with other people, but be quickly backed up by Katherine. She was hot-headed and ready to fight at any second, ready to seek vengeance on anyone for anything.
They were married in 1974 and arrived at the wedding ceremony on her motorcycle.
Bad bitch.
Upon their arrival, Kellett received a warning from Katherine's mother. She warned him that Katherine had a screw loose somewhere. that he should never cheat on her ever, and that if he ever got on her wrong side, he's done for. Fucked.
That night, they went home and married heterosexual love. 3 times. The only reason why I know that is because he woke up to her strangling him. From what she understood, her parents had sex 5 times on their wedding night, and she thought that was a more ideal number.
The marriage would actually cool down a lot after that. JK. He would return home late from a darts tournament one night, only to find that all of his clothes and shoes were burned, and then he would be hit by her with a frying pan,
Leaving him with a confused ass whooping and a fractured skull.
He would run to a neighbor's house in fear for his life, and Katherine would talk him out of pressing charges. Later, he would leave her for another woman shortly after the birth of their first child in 1976. That same year, she was seen walking down the street with a baby carriage, aggressively jerking it from side to side, and was admitted into a mental institution and diagnosed with postnatal depression, also called the baby blues.
That hoe had more than the baby blues. She then was released from the hospital, only to place her 2-month-old baby on railroad tracks on some Looney Tunes bullshit moments before a train is due.
She left that scene, stole a fucking axe from someone's backyard, and right there started swinging that bitch around like Jack Nicholson. She was apprehended, and the baby was saved off of the railroad tracks before the train arrived by a passerby.
At the same mental institution as before, she was sent back. But apparently, she recovered and signed herself out that day. The same day as the railroad incident. Huh.
Anyway, Katherine took a few breaks from wild bullshit. Just a few days later, threatened a woman with a knife, cut her face, and took her family hostage, demanding to be taken to kill it. They got so far before the family escaped at a gas station, but by the time authorities arrived, the Speckled Hen had a hostage. She was disarmed and taken to a mental institution where she would confide in a nurse that she had planned to kill Kellett and his mother and the mechanic that worked on his car that he left town in, because obviously her point wouldn't have been proven if he were to be allowed to live for some reason. From what I understand, Kellett was informed of this incident and broke up with his girlfriend, moved back to Aberdeen with his mom to support Katherine. Because, why would you want to live in an environment where your life and your mom's isn't being threatened by a toxic ultra bitch? You wouldn't.
They moved to Ipswich after she's released from the institution. There, she finds herself a job at another meat establishment. In 1983, she goes on to have another daughter, and in 84, her and Kellett break up. She breaks up with him, though, and it's okay when she did it.
In 1986, she met our latest victim of domestic abuse, David Saunders. David had kind of sort of moved in with her, but was still kind of keeping his old apartment. What we know about Katherine is she is insecure and jealous and fucking crazy. And the ideas she had of what he was doing in his old place would lead to an argument that resulted in her slitting the throat of his 2-month-old dingo puppy and knocking him out with, can you guess what object?
Somehow or another, they got past that and the pan, and in 1988, Katherine goes on to have her 3rd daughter with David Saunders, and this impulses David to go on and put a down payment on a house for all of them. Now, the house that we're talking about, Katherine was in charge of decorating. So,
incident that occurred in that house would spring from an argument that they had while Katherine was ironing. She would strike David in the face with the hot iron, leaving a mark that was visible for weeks. From what I understand, she grabbed his arm and put him in somewhat of an awkward position where he couldn't fight back very easily, and continued to strike him with the hot iron. In that same argument, she stabbed him in the stomach with a pair of scissors.
Now, from what we know about that situation, Saunders ended up taking a long leave from work, moving away. Katherine Knight did try to find him, but she was unsuccessful. 1990 rolls around and Katherine is yet again pregnant. This time it's by a guy named John Chillingworth. Their relationship lasts for about 3 years until Katherine's hoe ass leaves him for another John, whom she'd been having an affair with for a little while.
All right, here we are. The final John, John Price, or Pricey, as some people called him. He was already a father of 3 whenever Katherine came into the picture. And he was a pretty well-known guy about town, and everyone seemed to like him. Even people that didn't really know him very well. Pricey was well aware of Katherine's malicious behavior, and after a few months of dating, Katherine would have her hopes up for a wedding ring. Falsely. And Pricey's explanation for this was that he was only in it for the sex. She took that with a grain of salt. Not really.
Buckle up.
She would start off with the lighter stuff, telling his children lies about him to put him in a bad light in their eyes. Katherine and Pricey weren't technically living together, but he would tell his friends that he wanted her out of his place. But to her, it wasn't his place. To Katherine, it was her domain, and she intended to stay.
In response to Katherine finding out that she was left out of John Price's will, she then goes on to take some photographs of some out-of-date medical supplies that John had laying around the house. She shows his boss this evidence, claiming that he stole it from work, but that has never been confirmed. He was fired for that. People that knew John knew that his job meant a lot to him, and losing it was devastating.
He was pissed, and he kicked her out. She had to go back to her place. He made it a few months before he had to go and take her back, losing the respect of his friends who had picked up the pieces that were left behind by Katherine in her wake during their last entanglement. So much so, they had to stop going to the pub that his friends typically went to.
The week of his death, on Sunday, they had an argument which resulted in the cops being called. The next day, John went and showed his colleagues where he had previously been stabbed by Katherine. He also let his boss know that he planned on going to the cops to get Katherine out of his life. He was told that he could have a court date in 3 weeks, but John knew he didn't have that long.
So the week prior to his death, John would run to everyone for help. His friends, his boss, his neighbors, and the police. His friends tried to tell him not to go home that day, but he told them he had to for fear that Katherine would hurt his children. His kids were sent to a friend's house that night for a sleepover. Katherine would arrive a little before midnight. She'd take a shower, put on some lingerie, watch a little TV, and then she went to bed that night with Pricey. And they had sex.
March 1st, 2000. Constable Scott Matthews and Sergeant Graham Furlonger were performing a welfare check at the home of John Price, probably expecting to find that he was okay. They weren't anticipating anything that they would discover that day.
Entering the home, the air was thick with the fragrance of an unfamiliar dish. Reluctantly, they knew they had to go see what was cooking. And what they found on the stove was, well, not quite so good looking. True evil. Human head stewing in a pot with some veggies. On the table, there were 2 plates prepared, next to 2 notes with the name of the child each plate was intended for. In the lounge was a body. decapitated and skinned by someone who knew what they were doing. Also in the home on meat hooks was the pelt of John Price. He'd been stabbed 37 times in the back, chest, and stomach.
After coming across that gruesome scene, they find Katherine passed out from drugs in the bed. She was then detained. When Knight was brought into questioning, she claims to recall nothing from that night. In October 2001, she pled guilty and was sentenced life, making her the first woman in Australia to achieve that. Thank you so much for all of y'all out there that watched the video.
We hope we got to teach you something that you didn't know. If we did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And we hope to see you next time.